Greetings everyone, my name is Deadly Mio and today we're going to look at a gem from my childhood. I'm talking about none other than the western-themed side-scrolling shoot-'em-up Sunset Riders on the SNES. This title was published by Palcom Software Limited, which used to be a subsidiary of Konami for the European market that was founded during the NES era when Nintendo allowed the release of only 5 games per year for third-party companies. Konami was eager to circumvent this rule in order to localize a lot of the games they had already released in Japan. For the same reason, Konami also founded another subsidiary for the American market known as Ultra Software Corporation. Eventually, Nintendo relaxed the aforementioned restriction after the 1991 release of the Super Nintendo in North America, which led to Ultra Games and Palcom being absorbed by their parent company in 1992 and 1994 respectively. The story of how I discovered Sunset Riders is quite interesting in my opinion, so let me share it with you. When I was younger, my family and I would often go to Hungary for our holidays, and one of the places we would frequently visit in order to go swimming was a lake in the small town of Schuldverkehrt that has roughly 8,000 inhabitants. The lake was nice, but another really fascinating aspect about this place for me was the arcade they used to have there. Last time I visited the place, which admittedly also dates back some years at this point, there were only remnants left of the once great arcade. In any case, many years ago I was standing in this arcade and waiting for people whose games I could spectate, since I didn't have any money on me. Suddenly, these two guys step up and start playing Sunset Riders in co-op mode. The arcade version of this game allows for 4-player co-op as a matter of fact. These guys clearly knew what they were doing. They made it to the 5th stage relatively effortlessly, and I was standing in awe of their skills and of what was presented to me on the screen in general. I had to play that game, but it never happened during that particular holiday, and next time we visited that lake again, the cabinet was gone. I didn't remember the name of the game back then either, and therefore couldn't really try to convince my parents to get it for me. So it basically came and went, and only some vague memories about the game remained. Fast forward some years to when I visited a flea market with my father. Every now and again when we visited flea markets, which we used to do fairly often back in the days, he would buy me something I really wanted. Not always necessarily a game, but whatever piqued my interest. And that was the day when it happened. My fateful reunion with Sunset Riders. I saw the cover art and thought, that seems familiar. Could it be that game I saw back then? I was fairly certain, but still had some doubts. We made the purchase, and when we returned home I immediately put the game into my SNES, the memories became clearer, and I was the happiest kid on the planet at that very moment. This story probably had more to offer than the plot of the game itself. You play one of 4 bounty hunters and initially go after 4 different bosses. After saving some saloon girls from the clutches of the stage 4 boss duo, the Smith brothers, you learn that there's a huge reward being offered for the main villain of the game, going by the name of Sir Richard Rose. But I also warned that he always has 3 sidekicks with him. So you set out on a quest to first take down the latter in order to face the head honcho later in a final showdown, and that's pretty much all there is to the story. The gameplay is pretty straightforward too, as you probably have already noticed by now. Kill enemies, dodge bullets and explosives, fight bosses, collect auto shot and dual wield power-ups. Wait a minute, dual wielding again? I swear I'm not addicted to akimbo weapons. Anyways, you can shoot in 8 different directions by pressing the D-pad in the appropriate manner, jump over obstacles and evade bullets with the B button, and perform a slide move to the left or right by pressing the A button and one of those 2 directions on the D-pad. There is also the option in most stages to move between an upper and a lower plane on the screen by pressing the B button and the up or down button respectively. This isn't possible at every spot within the stage, but the background usually gives you a very good idea where it can and where it can't be done. For example, projecting roofs of buildings or balconies more likely than not can be climbed. Furthermore, you have 2 character types to choose from. The pistoliers, namely Steve and Billy, which shoot in a straight line with their first gun, and if you pick up the dual wield power-up at an angle of roughly 40 degrees from that baseline with their second gun. The shotgunners Komano and Bob can unleash a storm of shotgun pellets that will obliterate everyone within a certain cone, whose diameter will grow slightly when the dual wield power-up is picked up. Both of these character types have their advantages and disadvantages. I personally prefer to run shotgunners as these are able to deal massive damage at close range to bosses and are more convenient to use in horseback stages. In these stages, targets will pop up from 5 different directions and take you down fast if you don't get off the first shot, and while pistol users will have to be more precise with their aiming in these situations due to how these weapons work, shotgunners can aim in the general direction of the target and still land a hit. On top of that, the benefit of being able to take out enemies that are far removed from one another while dual wielding doesn't come into play as much as you'd hope, so it doesn't really warrant using the pistols over the shotguns. Not to mention that shotguns have a pretty decent spread too, as you'd expect from that type of weapon, and of course, one hit is enough to strip you of all your power-ups. Why even use Billy or Steve then at all, you may ask? Well, some bosses are arguably easier to take down with them. In a fight against Stage 1 boss Simon Greedwell, for example, you'll be able to shoot at a boss or his cover with one pistol, while taking out this henchman on one of the 2 balconies to his left and right with a second gun, without having to adjust your aim on the D-pad. Also, Stage 7 boss Palcom perfectly lines up with the, let's call it, angled second gun while dual wielding, when you're on the far left of the screen. The autoshot power-up rids you of the task of having to repeatedly tap the Y button to shoot continuously by allowing you to just hold it down instead to achieve the same end result. It bestows pistols with a faster fire rate compared to shotguns, which can come in handy against bosses at those long ranges where the pellet spread of shotguns is too large for all of them to hit the target, essentially allowing you to deal more damage in less time. In most cases though, especially when you lose a life and in consequence your power-ups, you want to be using a shotgun. Fighting a boss with a single pistol is a miserable experience and will make your life 10 times harder. A single shotgun without any power-ups isn't great by any means either, but it will at least give you a fighting chance. What I also hate about the pistols is that in some cases you aren't even able to hit targets right in front of you without performing some fancy jump shots. I experienced this in some cases during the horseback stages when enemies appear from the inside of a horse-drawn carriage in front of you, and in one particular case while moving hand over hand along a rope in Chief Wigwam's stage. Bottom line is, just stay away from the pistols unless you want to make the game even harder for yourself. Speaking of difficulty, I'm currently only playing on normal since I mainly wanted to play this for the sake of nostalgia rather than to give myself an extreme challenge. But don't get me wrong, this game will require a lot of trial and error before you can beat it on normal every single time, so it's not exactly a walk in the park. Back in the days, I was so good at this that I could beat it without getting hit once. This run isn't quite as impressive as that, but I'm more or less satisfied with it anyway since I practiced the game not for an extended period of time before actually capturing this footage. If you really want to see it getting beaten on hard mode, I can attempt to do that at some point in the future. In many aspects, hard mode is identical to normal mode, but you will notice a difference, especially when fighting the bosses. The bosses shoot more projectiles each burst and with increased speed, and even the henchmen will be subject to speed boosts. I might need some more practice for that however, since some of the strategies I use in normal mode don't work the same way in hard mode. For instance, normal mode can be pretty much beaten without using the slide move once if you so desire, whereas in hard mode it's an essential tool for survival. In light of this harsh difficulty, you might be wondering how many lives you're provided with. On the default setting, you can take 2 hits per continue, of which you get 3. Even on normal, you'll burn through those pretty quickly when you're new to the game or like me out of practice, but rest assured, the bounties you'll receive for beating bosses and regular enemies will eventually grant you extra lives once certain sums of cash are accumulated. In normal mode, you'll receive an extra life at $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 and $500,000. In order to increase your income and thus your chances of earning 1-ups, you'll also want to give it your all in the bonus stages you'll get to play in between stage 2 and 3 as well as between stage 5 and 6. During these stages you'll enter a first-person perspective and have to take out bandits that appear from 8 different positions on the screen corresponding to the 8 directions on the D-pad. Press the right direction on the D-pad and the shoot button to take care of each foe from the group of 50 before they disappear, which is easier said than done as close to the end of the stage up to 3 bandits at once will be on screen for a duration of only 2 seconds. You'll receive a reward of $300 for each bad guy you eliminate, and should you be skilled enough to hit all 50, a bonus reward of $15,000 in addition to the $15,000 you would expect to be awarded. Funny story, when I used to play this game in co-op mode with my big brother, he would always just mash the D-pad and the shoot button in those stages, and even after I explained to him how to do it properly, he continued doing so for comedic value. Finally, it is worth noting that in the last 3 stages you'll also find collectible 1-up hearts, one in each stage, that'll further assist you on your journey. Let me also bring your attention to the soundtrack of this game. It is beautiful. Almost every boss battle and stage has its own unique tune, and all of them set the right tone for the situation they are used in. Let's give it a listen, shall we? All I can say is great job by the composer of the original soundtrack for the arcade version, Motoaki Furukawa, and by Naohisa Morota for bringing it to the SNES. The latter used to be employed at Sunsoft, where he worked on Famicom versions of soundtracks from Sega arcade games like Afterburner 2 and Fantasy Zone. He is also responsible for creating sound drivers and the digitized bass samples that were used in Sunsoft developed games. Having been involved in the audio-related work of games from this developer, even if not directly as a composer, speaks volumes about someone's talent. Listening to some of the great soundtracks and actually acknowledging the sound effects of Sunsoft games such as Journey to Silius, Blaster Master and Festus Quest should clear any potential doubts you may still have regarding this matter. Since we're in the sound department already, let me quickly address the voice lines of the different characters you can hear at the start of and after boss fights. They are super cheesy, but that's also why I can't help but like them. It's such a minor detail, but those few voice lines really give your opponents and your character some resemblance of personality. For instance, the money-hungry Simon Greedwell fittingly greets you with,
"It's time to pay."
I will say though, it is a little unfortunate that all of the player characters use the same voice lines. This way they just all come across as the stereotypical righteous, ingenuous hero. These guys are supposed to be bounty hunters. Couldn't there be a sassy guy, a silent but very experienced character, a smart strategist, or something like that? I don't expect character depth by any means. As mentioned earlier, this is no story-driven game, but at least make them clearly distinguishable from one another. At least in the visual department you can clearly tell them apart. The sprites are visually appealing and detailed, and the animations are pretty neat too. Damn, they even have customized horses. Very stylish, I must say. The backgrounds also have a fair amount of detail, but sometimes reuse certain elements like the tavern buildings with the swinging doors. Although I guess you can't complain too much, since you actually can enter those particular buildings and others to collect power-ups and perform recreational activities. This is really just nitpicking though, since elements aren't reused to an extent where you could speak of lazy design. Now that we have covered the basics of this game, let me go on a quick tangent and say a couple of words about retro games on my channel in general. Capturing retro game footage is not always easy. I am lucky to own a DVD recorder that I was able to use for capturing this particular footage, and I might be able to use it in combination with other consoles and games in the future. However, at this point I'm not sure how I'm going to capture footage from my Amstrad computer, and there are most likely going to be issues when I want to use that PAL DVD recorder to record gameplay from my NTSC NES as well. I really have a lot to say about the Amstrad and the NES in particular, so this problem needs to be addressed. Of course, I still own an N64, PS2 and plenty of retro PC games, but I'd prefer to find a solution to this problem sooner rather than later, so that I don't have to limit myself in terms of the content that I'm able to produce. I'm just pointing this out in case you were expecting an equal number of retro game and FPS related videos. Eventually I want to be able to fulfill that expectation, but that might still take some time for those very reasons. So overall, would I recommend Sunset Riders? If it hasn't become apparent already, I am deeply attached to this game, and even when I try to look at it from a neutral stance, there's not really much I can complain about. The game might be very hard, but it is at no point really unfair. It frustrates you in a way that makes you want to try and try again until you finally succeed, which is the kind of challenge that I personally seek when I pick up games, and that many titles fail to provide. Nowadays games are often too easy, and back in the NES era you had to wonder sometimes whether certain games were even play tested prior to their release because they seemed impossible to beat. I'm looking at you, NES Ghostbusters. So all in all, if you enjoy side-scrolling shoot 'em ups such as Contra, definitely give this one a go. I can assure you that you won't be disappointed. The fast-paced action will pump you up and leave you craving for more, and since this game lives from its challenging nature, it also has a lot of replay value. This concludes my review of Sunset Riders, and next week I believe it's finally time for that rainbow video I promised. And while preparing that, I'll simultaneously also be capturing some new COD World War II footage, since the Blitzkrieg event has arrived and new weapons are here for us players to enjoy. That's all for now from me, and to round off this video I'll now show you the intense final boss fight in its entirety. Thank you for watching, and until next time.
Hasta la bye bye. Do you accept? I say, bit of bad luck.